today we're going to be talking about addressing learner variability with universal design for learning. And one of the things that we have in common, I think, with Modern Classroom Projects and also with Ignite Online Academy, who is here with us, is that we're all really trying to figure out how to design to reach each learner and what are the tools and ways that we can do that. And so I'm excited to share, really a convergence of these approaches and how they show up within Ignite Online Academy. And so my name is Jessica Jackson. I'm the Practitioner Partnership Director at the Learner Variability Project. Before coming to the Learner Variability Project, I was an educator and administrator for 20 years. And I am really excited to have Matthew Hickson here, who is the principal of Ignite Online Academy. And he also served on the Learner Variability Practitioner Advisory Board last year. So he knows a lot about learner variability and also uses the Modern Classroom Project in his school. So it's great to have him here along with two of his stellar team members, Tiffany Bird, who is a coach at Ignite Online Learning, and Mary Katherine Hill, who is a teacher. And so we're going to be hearing from them as well. So just a quick overview, we're going to start by sharing a little bit about learner variability and universal design for learning, and then introduce you to the Modern Classroom Project and how Ignite Online Learning Academy puts all of this together in the way that they do school. And so really excited to dive in with you all today. So to start it off, I just wanted to share this little tidbit from research, which shows that studies show that teacher self-efficacy and feeling more able to adapt education to meet students' individual needs is related to greater job satisfaction and less teacher burnout. And so teachers may vary in their certainty that they know how to adapt instruction and assignments to meet individual needs. And so the greater the certainty in their ability, the greater their job satisfaction and the less they report fatigue and frustration. So I think this is just a great kind of note from research to kick off with and understand why this is important, because there is a lot of teacher burnout right now. I hear about it all the time. It's been a difficult year. And before that, it was a difficult year, right? And so there's a lot of reasons. And so the more we can support teachers to feel confident and have greater job satisfaction, the better. And so I'm excited to share more that can help with that. So what do we mean when we say learner variability? Learner variability is the recognition that each student has a unique set of strengths and challenges across a whole child framework that are interconnected and vary according to context. So what are some of the key words here? Well, we are talking about each student. Every student has learner variability. This is not something that just pertains to students with a diagnosed disability. Every student is unique. And when we think about that, we think about their strengths and their challenges. And we're really thinking about the whole child. So, social and emotional, cognitively, and their background and how all of that intersects with the content and how it can vary according to context. So for example, if a student doesn't get enough sleep at night, that can affect their working memory, which can affect how they do a vocabulary lesson the next day, right? And so just understanding all those connections helps us provide better supports for students. I also wanted to just take a minute to talk about the importance of context and how that can affect learner variability. So this meme here is one of my favorites. It says, when two introverts meet and ironically act like extroverts with each other. And I think it just illustrates the idea that even though we often like to give ourselves labels and label students because it helps us categorize things, we aren't one way all the time. And so while I may think of myself as an introvert, in a small group setting or team meeting, I can be very loud and, even pushy and other things that I might not be in a very large group setting. And so context really matters in terms of that. And so it's important to keep that in mind. And to give a more school-based example, if you think about motivation in your favorite subject versus your least favorite subject, how does that change how you engage with that content? Or a teacher that you really like versus one that you don't get along with, how does that affect how you engage in their content? And so really keeping in mind that context matters, and it is going to change students' strengths and challenges as they interact with the environment and the people in their environment. And it's also why I just wanted to take a moment to say learning styles is actually not backed by research. And because it ignores the context principle. It says that we learn one way, or it gives us that label of visual learner and the idea that that is the only way we can learn. And in truth, we actually, we may prefer visual learning at times, but we can learn other ways. And what research does show is that multimodal supports processing new information and long-term memory. And so really, and what that means is just providing all three opportunities to engage with multimodal, visual, auditory, and kinesthetic together helps with long-term memory. So that's just a little bit more about the context principle. But when we understand learner variability in this way, I think it really helps us think about classroom challenges as a design problem instead of a student problem. So it's not that the student can't do certain things, it's that how can we design things to meet their needs so that they can engage with content and we can address their learner variability. And one of the ways we can do that is through universal design for learning. And so we'll drop a link in the chat. If you're new to Universal Design for Learning, CAST has a lot of resources that really can walk you through this framework. But simply put, it's saying that you need to provide more choice and for students throughout the lessons to address so that they can feel a certain amount of autonomy and have their needs met, their learner variability met. And so specifically, you want to provide multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. And so this kind of gives you a great starting point if the idea of meeting the needs of all of your students feels overwhelming. UDL is a great place to start because you can kind of make sure that you are adding choices in with these guidelines in mind. And so I wanted to share the tool that we have at the Learner Variability Project, which is the Learner Variability Navigator, because I think this tool can really help you take universal design for learning to the next level. And so I want to quickly show you how this tool works. It is free, and we'll put a link to the chat, so you're welcome to explore a bit more on your own. But once you come to the Navigator, you'll see that we have 7 different learner models. So I'm going to go into the Literacy 712 model. And here you see what we call our factor map. So factors are variables that have been found to predict student outcomes in a certain content area or group. And so these are all factors that can impact learning. And one of my favorite features of the Navigator is that it shows you how these factors are connected. And so if we're thinking about multiple means or ways to engage students, what are some factors that may impact that? It could be motivation. It could be sense of belonging. It could be stereotype threat. And how do those connect to cognitive factors like working memory? And so when we click on one of these factors, you will actually get a summary of the research on that factor. And you'll see a little bit more about how this factor is connected to other factors. And as you scroll down, you can also see research-based strategies that can support that factor. And so if we're thinking about ways to engage students and we want to foster a sense of belonging, these are some strategies that we can kind of pull from and helps us, be more strategic and intentional about the ways in which we're meeting the needs of our students. And so maybe it is to incorporate students' cultural practices into your lessons. This is a great way to improve engagement and kind of keep it relevant to students. And so if you click on this strategy, you get an overview of the research. You can see, a video of that strategy in action. We often have examples of ed tech tools and products that have it in there, as well as resources to help you incorporate the strategy into your classroom and the other factors that it supports. And so that is just a quick overview of the different parts of the Navigator. So you have the factor map and then the strategies. And I think that can just support learner variability and identifying those strategies and really understanding what are some of the factors that could be impacting students and keeping that whole child lens in mind. And so if we understand learner variability, then I think we can design learning environments that support the whole learner. We can foster personalization and a sense of belonging that honors students' identities. And we can enable powerful learning that builds towards agency and better educational outcomes. And so the last thing I'll share is just that research has shown that even brief professional development for educators on the science of learning and memory can have vast benefits for their confidence and understanding of instructional approaches, which includes showing an increase in student-centered approaches. And that is really, I think, what Modern Classroom Project shows. It is a student-centered approach, and the way that Ignite Online Learning has embraced that, as well as other practices to kind of have a student-centered approach, is awesome. And so I'm going to kick it over to Matt to tell you more about that.
Great, thanks everyone, and good evening. I'm really glad y'all are able to join us. It's cool to see that we have folks from all over the world here. That was really interesting to see and exciting. If you're like me and you're on webinars, you're probably like pushing all these links onto your second screen right now and like halfway paying attention to what I'm saying so that you can like rifle through the CAST site and all of the other resources that have been shared. And I think that's great. And if you're new to learner variability and you're looking at this concept and thinking, oh yeah, this resonates with me, right? We talk about differentiation in schools a lot. And I know that my students are going to be, depending on the context, needing a lot of different inputs and needing that universal design context for the classroom in order to succeed. And then you're thinking, well, how do I do that? I'm one person or one school that's trying to build a design for our learning program. And I want to tell you a little bit about the story of how we got to Modern Classrooms Project, because I think it demonstrates this level of thinking and the way that we kind of went about building our school. So I'm going to talk to you about Ignite, and then I'm really excited to be done talking and pass it over to our teachers so you can get lots more resources to click on from them because they have some incredible things. So I'll just first start by saying that we were a school that was created out of the virtual academy kind of model that existed in a lot of districts during the pandemic, but has since become a full virtual school. So we have our own staff, we are separate from other schools in our district, and we are fully virtual. And when our district asked us to take on this challenge of designing a new school and kind of branching out in the middle of a pandemic to start this more permanent and long-term virtual school, we're in a district that is 81% students of color. That is one of the top districts in our state in terms of the percentage of students that are living in poverty. We are a district that has 54 different schools that often had many different ways of operating and certainly had different ways of operating during virtual learning. And our district said, here you go, you're going to create one school out of all of that virtual learning. All the students that are going to come to you will come from all over the county. They will be, in our case, extremely representative of the population of our county as a whole, actually. You'll have 700 students, 130 of them or so will have IEPs, and you'll have students that are reading on a college level and students that are 4 and 5 grade levels behind coming out of the pandemic. You all know this experience because it's happening in almost every school, and it was happening for us. And we were starting and saying, how do we do that, right? How do we bridge that gap? And so we started looking around and thinking to ourselves, we really want to focus in on personalization and differentiation as the core parts of the model that we build. So Jessica, if you want to go to the next slide. We we looked at personalized learning and said we really wanted to think about person, pace, and path. And you all have probably seen some of these terms if you're familiar with personalized learning. How do we create a path that's unique for our learners that they can choose based on who they are and kind of the pace that they feel comfortable with learning? And we had to surround that with a lot of data in order to understand where our students were and be able to make instructional choices within our program to support them in achieving mastery on learning goals, right? That was the framework that we came in from. And if you go to the next slide, I always like to kind of use this analogy of we were trying to build a GPS as opposed to a traditional map, right? So there's two images on the next slide that have our traditional map and our GPS, right? The traditional map, really good if you're like starting at point A and going to point B all at the same speed. There's no wrong turns, and you know exactly where you're going all the time. Not so helpful if you're lost. Not so helpful if you missed a day of class. Not so helpful, you see where the analogy is going, right? So we wanted to build a program that was more and more headed in the direction of being the GPS, where we had a lot of data about our students, where we were able to make smart instructional choices in a universal design model. And so we found the Modern Classrooms project, and we were like, this is really cool. This helps us check a lot of these boxes, and it gets us closer to making sure that we can build that sort of universal design into our program and meet the needs of all of our learners. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about how, and I'll start by showing a video from Modern Classrooms project. Jessica will go ahead and start it, and this video kind of shares it better than I could. So we'll go ahead and just play it for you. You can listen through.
Tell me if this has happened to you.
What this might look like in your environment and context.
You come to school one day, the teacher's at the board, and it's time for the lesson. Except you were homesick yesterday. So when the teacher starts talking, you're not sure what they're talking about. You're lost. Or maybe you learned this last year. So when the teacher explains what you already know, you're bored. Or maybe you're just having a bad day. It happens. The teacher's talking, but you can't focus. You're distracted. And meanwhile, the teacher's not sure what to do. The teacher is stressed. But what if your teacher steps down from the front of the room? If you are sick, you don't have to worry. Your teacher's lessons are on video, so you can pick up right where you left off. This isn't from YouTube, by the way. Your teacher made the video, and you're watching them explain. So you're not lost anymore. You're engaged. And if you already know the content, you can move ahead and do an extension activity. You can work on this with your classmates. Now you aren't bored anymore. You're challenged. And if you're having a bad day, the teacher has time to sit with you. They can ask what's wrong and help you feel better. You aren't distracted anymore. You feel supported. And by the way, your teacher realizes that they can meet your needs. And they can feel successful. We call this a modern classroom. Welcome! In a modern classroom, you'll notice 3 new things. First, your teacher is creating videos for you. You can watch these videos in class or at home. You can pause, rewind, rewatch, or skip ahead if you get it. These don't replace your teacher, they just clone your teacher so that they can support you individually. Next, you'll learn at your own pace. When you get things quickly, you move ahead quickly. When you need more time, you'll have the time you need. This means you'll learn as much as you can without being rushed or held back. Finally, you're really going to learn things. In fact, you'll master them. You won't move to lesson 2 until you really understand lesson 1. So when you learn something new, you're really going to learn it. After all, you're too capable for anything less than true understanding. So that's a modern classroom for you. Now what are you waiting for? Let's learn!
So the Modern Classrooms project model has 3 really critical components. And I really hope this next image is not trademarked because ours looks very similar, but in different branded colors when you look on our website. And we talk about our instructional model, right? As a school, we said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to try to really adopt this model, especially in our secondary program. And it has 3 pieces. It has that blended instruction with teacher-created instructional videos, the self-paced structure that they just mentioned, and then a mastery-based grading approach that asks students to revise things that they might not be quite at mastery yet, and then go back and rewatch those videos and be able to continuously learn according to how they're doing. It's a roadmap for really building understanding, like you heard in the video. And I just want to also note and point out as we're talking about the model, one of the cool things about it Thanks, Michelle, for throwing that extra endorsement in the chat too. One of the other cool things about it, when Jessica mentioned the context principle, many of you have probably been in schools where there are classroom management challenges, right? We look and say, we want to do something to help teachers with classroom management. That is always a context problem. It's a tier 1 instructional and environmental design problem that the adults are responsible for fixing, right? And what I really believe is that a model like this that allows teachers to, again, clone themselves and check in with students, and I think it mentioned it in the video, you know, students having a bad day, those check-ins are really powerful for changing the way that dynamic exists in the classroom, where it is often a power struggle between the teacher in the front and students that are trying to have their needs met, and there's a disconnect there. And so I just wanted to kind of note there too that we've seen the sort of power of developing those relationships when we look at our social emotional learning data at grade levels that are really implementing this. Maybe Mary Katherine will say something a little more about that, because her grade level in particular does this model with extreme fidelity and has really powerful relationships between students and staff. And so that is another benefit on top of the instructional design piece. So we can jump forward a little bit. And then I'll just finally share that there's connections here that you can see that are pretty obvious between the concept of learner variability and the whole child and the model. The model allows for teachers to build a self-paced and differentiated structure, to build in individual supports for students, and allows you really to move at your own pace as a young person and make choices that ultimately build your agency as a learner. And you don't have to just trust me on this. We went through the Learner Variability Navigator as a team at Ignite and actually checked off 10 strategies that are the most common strategies that Modern Classrooms Project teachers implement. And we use the Variability Navigator to check those strategies. And then what the Navigator does is it kind of takes all your strategies as an input and then spits out how research says they connect with these different factors in 4 critical domains of learning: background for students, social emotional learning, cognition, and literacy development. So this is the 7-12 secondary literacy model that we're looking at. And you can see just how many of these areas the Modern Classrooms Project strategies check off. If you see a 10, that means all 10 strategies have a research-based connection to that particular factor. So things like attention, working with children with adverse experiences, building emotional and physical safety in the classroom. Self-regulation is a 9, and it's something we'll talk about later. We wanted to point this out and let you see this because it's using a tool that Jessica introduced a little bit earlier, but it's also giving a little bit of a research connection to why the Modern Classrooms Project works so well in building a universal design context inside of the classroom. So I'll just leave with the last piece just saying, we had a similar webinar last week, and one of the panelists said something that really stuck with me. She was a teacher and she uses the Modern Classrooms Project model. And she said, you know, I used to be a bell-to-bell teacher, and now I realize that I do things a lot differently. And when I was reflecting on that, I thought to myself, we've really become a beyond the bell school. We've built a context that allows us not to just be bell to bell, but to build a learning environment that students can access where and when they wish. About a quarter of our students regularly are on classes outside of normal school hours, including on Saturdays and Sundays. Now, we don't ask them to do that, but a lot of them are doing that because that's what works for them. That's what works for their schedule. They might have parents that work during the day and have to be out of the house for a little while, and then they check back in and do their work late in the evening. And so that idea of becoming a beyond the bell school in a 21st century environment is extremely exciting, and I think something that we can continue to build on as we implement the Modern Classrooms Project model. So I'm going to pass it over to Tiffany to pose some questions, and then Mary Katherine to follow up by giving you all the stuff you really want, which is a lot of great teacher resources.
Hey, thank you, Matt. We can go ahead to the next slide. And so from the previous slide, we looked at the Learner Variability Project heat map or factor map. And one thing that you will definitely notice is that we're talking about it from the standpoint of each individual student, because every student, of course, is a learner. Learns differently, or they're a different learner. But when we look at the umbrella of it all, the Learner Variability Project does fall under the umbrella of the Modern Classrooms Project, as we already have seen. And one thing, my work that I do at Ignite is basically with teachers. And so when you look at the question, who has the greatest impact on students? It is the teacher in front of the student. And so we want to also be able to use this with, assessing teachers, because the same tool can be used to assess teachers and these same areas to see how teachers respond, what's missing in terms of professional learning, and how can that impact the student learner in the classroom. So just another way to look at how to use this tool from the student's perspective, but also from the professional teacher perspective.
So on this next slide, I believe you'll see what it looks like if you log into my class. And so yes, so this is our Canvas page, which is our LMS. So I'm Mary Katherine Hill, and I teach 8th grade science. I also have a high school biology class. And entering this school year, things that really got me excited about modern classrooms was access and differentiation. That was something I felt like in my traditional classroom. I felt like I came from a school, whenever I transitioned into Ignite, my previous school had a lot of chronic absences, and I continuously felt like my students were popping in and just getting little pieces of assignments. So I was really excited to have this platform and to really thoroughly build a course that provided students with access at any time beyond the bell schedule, like Matt was saying. And so if you go to the next slide, we started thinking about whenever we are going beyond the bell schedule, our students really need to be self-regulated. And that's a skill that is going to benefit them throughout their lives. So that's something that I really, really want my students to learn. And as we require self-regulation in the classroom, we realize that we must explicitly teach what that looks like in order to engage in dialogue with our students about their vision of their self-regulation, because they're all coming from different backgrounds and different cultures. And so the ways that they think they might be self-regulating, they can be coming from a lot of places. So by having some common language and common tools in the classroom can really help us have a platform with our kids to help them see exactly what to do to self-regulate. So one of the tools on the next slide that you'll see is our pacing tracker. So this is something that whenever students come into class, we want them to know, you can come into class, or really you can log on to class and log into our modules at any time of the day and know what it is that you need to do next. So a frequent question I'll even ask students, even if I'm showing this, is what is your next step? What do you need to do next? And this pacing tracker is something that we try to update each class and keep updated regularly. We get to touch on some social emotional whenever we're providing those shout outs and encouragements to really cheer our students on as they're working through the modules at their pace. And you see in this that this is a classroom that we were having the issue of students kind of really wanting to keep powering ahead. We'd say, okay, go back and revise, go back and revise. And so I wanted to make sure that they could see exactly where they needed to revise. Like on student 1, you see that I linked remediation for that lesson. I linked a study resource, like a practice thing, and the reassessment. So whenever we said in the modern classrooms that we don't want students to just power ahead and get gaps in their knowledge, we want them to achieve mastery and that mastery-based grading. You see that that's a tool that we use to kind of direct students to go back, revise, and build up until mastery, which in my class I define as an 80%. And so on the next slide, you'll see another tool that we kind of use to help students self-regulate. So this is what's posted in class with the pacing tracker, but some students need a little bit extra support. So this is something we've implemented actually as an 8th grade team at Ignite. So there are several students that need extra support in knowing exactly what to do, and they need it all in one place. So students can fill out this weekly grid. And we've had a few students that just take the template of the weekly grid and fill it out themselves and might send it to the teachers to check that they're filling it out correctly, but this is a way for us to conference with our students to see how they plan and how they can plan out for the week and check off the assignments as they go. That's something I love with the Google check boxes. They can feel that kind of sense of accomplishment of checking things off as they monitor their progress and really learn to self-regulate with that. And so you can head on to the next slide. And so in addition to that self-regulation, we want students to feel motivated. We want them to have that piece where they're able to collaborate and conference. So in our rooms, in our Zoom meetings, we have flex seating, and in person you could have this as like tables around the room, so students could like physically move to new places whenever they advance to a lesson. But you see in this example, it has Ms. Freakin's room, which is our support specialist. And then students can go to the different breakout rooms to collaborate on different lessons. So you might separate breakout rooms by lesson. Sometimes you might separate it by certain support. I always make several meet with Hill rooms in my Zoom so that students could hop in there and I could just see that they're in there and head to the next one. Or they can call me in the Zoom room, but that way they can know that they get support and have that opportunity for collaboration. It's really fun to see students utilize that time to kind of form friendships, and you'll see like little groups of students form in that as an opportunity for them to like chat and talk about things that they're stuck on. And I love sometimes in like the main session of class when we start, someone will be like, I have a question on the explore water distribution. And someone's like, I'll hop in the breakout room with you. And so being able to facilitate that collaboration is really important for our students to stay motivated, and giving them shout outs and things like that can also help make them feel like they have that autonomy to go. And you can go to the next slide. And next we have promoting disciplinary literacy. So this is really important for students to learn the language within the subject area that they're learning. And so we want to provide the opportunity for them to interact with the disciplinary literacy in a lot of formats. And so you see here that this is where I kind of start. I build a pacing guide. So that's what this resource that you see here is called. And this just shows one lesson of it. But it is highlighted in terms of things that are must do's, should do's, aspire to do's. And I added an optional that's just for fun. And if you click twice, two more things will appear on this slide. I also code it with emojis. So the view that's got the color blocks is a thing that students can copy, and they can actually go through and reflect on their learning. So the larger box, they can take notes and add reflections. In that smaller box that's next to the recommended due date, they can put the date that they actually completed so that they can keep track of their pacing. They can do a quick reflection on if they've got it, kind of got it, or don't get it, to see if they need to do more practice. But there are several like read about it and engagement pieces where they can see what it's like in the world and go beyond if they feel like this is something like they've got or want to dive in deeper for. And so I like to use the emojis. The party hat's my favorite for the optional things. And then on the next slide, I'll pass it to Matt.
Yeah, I just want to make one note. As you're looking at all of the different design and to the question in the chat and some of the other questions, Mary Katherine will probably drop in a link in just a second that y'all are going to really love, with lots and lots of resources, including Google Doc copies of everything that you've seen in our presentation. One of the things that I think is really important for us, because we're a virtual school, but I would recommend any school implementing Modern Classrooms Project to do, is to build design conventions that are specific to your context, that really take in detail and flesh out what the model looks like when it's built into a learning management system. Now, a learning management system doesn't have to be Canvas. It can be a lot of different things. Some people use a learning management system that is part technology and part paper pencil, but it's a system in their classroom that exists and manages students through the self-paced learning process. For us, obviously, it's Canvas. It's a learning management system that is digital. But either way, it is really important to have conventions, common language that you use with students, so that their cognitive load can be decreased as they navigate from class to class, because they're not trying to figure out what everyone's calling the should do and the aspire to do in every classroom, or where to find the mastery check. Things like that seem small are really critical, because once you reach a point where students really understand the model and know how to navigate it and have this sense of common design conventions across classrooms, the focus and attention to learning is really the only thing that they do when they get in the classroom. It becomes incredibly focused and automated in a way that allows students to engage in a lot of different ways and really builds their confidence as learners to make those choices. And so I just want to share that, because you can look at all of these resources and say, like, whoa, that's a lot of stuff that's going on within the model, but also like within the way that we've designed the model. There are a lot of things that you just saw. It's really based on tight design conventions that we try to be as consistent as possible with across all of our classes. So if you look at the 8th grade team, Mary Katherine's, if you see the resources, you'll see the pacing guides for English, for science, for math. They look extremely similar. They have all of the same language. So our students don't have that challenge as they're navigating through classes. And so I want to kind of wrap up there, because I'm seeing some awesome questions that I think will be more productive if we spend our time addressing and doing the things that you all want to learn about.
Great. Well, yeah, let's jump to Q&A, and I'm actually just going to stop sharing so that we can they can see us a little better, and we can always jump back in if we want to talk through something with a visual. So I saw a lot of great questions. I wanted to, there's a couple that were kind of similar around what does it take to like get started, you know, like, and kind of how, and I saw Emily, you know, weighed in on this in the chat, but I'd love to kind of hear from you all, like what were some of the challenges getting started, and how is that different after you kind of get past that point?
Yeah, I'm going to let Mary Katherine start here, because she's recently built 2 different courses this year. Not something I would normally recommend. 1 prep a year is like the standard going rate, but Mary Katherine built 2 courses this year, so she can start telling her experience, then I'll share some notes from other teachers.
Yeah, so I feel like to get started, kind of do it one step at a time is definitely how you have to look at it. And where like my thought process whenever I approach a unit, I do it like module at a time, and I say, okay, like what objectives, what standards do I need to cover in this unit? And I also will admit I come from a project-based learning mindset, so that's something that I also like to implement. So it's been habitual for me to kind of have a little bit of a backwards design approach, to be able to be like, okay, all of these things, like in biotechnology, something that's a super fun unit. Like our students could take biotechnology in a lot of different routes and really explore it in terms of medicine or agriculture or several things. So that might be where I start. I'm like, okay, I'm going to do something with biotechnology. These are the standards. This is something that's real world that could relate to all of these standards. And that is an aspire to do project that I allow students to add to throughout a module. But then it's really important to scaffold that. So I couldn't just be like, here's a project, go for it. Having lessons that are built in that allow them to accomplish a chunk of that project, and aligning it to the modern classrooms model is a way that I start. But really it's like, okay, I know these standards in this one lesson, I want to teach it, and I have the ed puzzle. I am pretty reliant on CK12 for some text, because that's really science specific, but Newsela is great, and some other resources to allow students to read about it, because I think in addition to having the text, it's helpful for students to have a visual to read and go back on. And I always have guided notes that go with my ed puzzle. So those are first. And then I allow students to kind of dive in with an exploration or practice. And then they have a mastery check at the end, which I usually do embedded in Canvas as like several questions. It doesn't have to be a ton, that just hit the key takeaways from that standard that I'm addressing in that lesson. And then it's like, if you're going above and beyond now, you can add to your project. So those are kind of the steps that I follow. I will address, like, in doing that, something that I've learned, because this has been my first year with modern classrooms, is, and it was shown, if you look at our heat map, whenever we made that heat map, we're like, okay, these are the things, if you're doing the bare basics of the modern classrooms, that you'll hit. And I love that it hits like socioeconomic and access so well for our students. One of the things that you'll see 0 on was reasoning. So something that I've been trying to push myself to do is to have more of that engaged piece at the beginning. So even if you start to use the MCP model and want to like add in some components of the 5E model, the engage, explore, explain, elaborate, evaluate, then that can really hit on that reasoning piece. And that's what's really cool about the Digital Promise tool, because you could go in there and be like, all right, I already do these things. If I use modern classrooms too, like, look how many things I would hit. And so hopefully that kind of addresses some of the ways that you get started. Some of it you do know, like, okay, I'm gonna have to build a lot. There is gonna be some time outside of class time that I'm having to actually record these videos. Whenever I was first going through it, it was like, I wanted to get each video perfect, and I really learned to let that go once the school year started. And it's like, you know what? You got time for one take. And so that's something that's helpful. Those Edpuzzles, having embedded questions, help engage students and really give them that thought check, because otherwise they will sit there and kind of zone out. So you want them to have a little bit of a check to be engaged. But those are some of my key starting points.
I'll just add one thing for our district leaders, coaches, and principals. Advocate, if you have teachers in your building that are doing this, or you're trying to implement at some scale, advocate for the time that's necessary. We brought all of our teachers in on extra duty contracts early to start their design process, because we knew it would take additional time at the front, and that time pays off so big at the end. So advocate to your district, advocate for resources to be able to give teachers the time to do that in advance of the school year and not wait for later.
So lots of questions coming in. Wanted to throw another one out there. What are the opportunities to collaborate, and when are there times where maybe there is, you have more kids doing the same thing at the same time? And so maybe you could, I think you may have touched on that a little bit in the presentation, but if you could elaborate a little more on how you do that.
I can say a few things about your perspective, and Matt will probably have a few things to add. I will say thank you, Matt, for all the advocating that he does for our time, because yes, it is a lot of time. And it takes time to think through critically on how to allow students to collaborate within this model, because you do start to feel like, okay, people are in all these different places. What can we do? And so that's something that I feel like is a continual work in progress in some ways. Some ways that I've seen success are grouping students that are in the same pace. Like if I'm like, okay, all of these people are looking at this same thing, I'm going to put them together and be like, all right, let's work through it together, especially if they're behind pace, so that we can have those kind of small groups. And you could even like elect a student leader within several of those groups. So before class time, kind of using your pacing tracker, once you update that, be like, okay, look, these people are in the same spot, group them together. And then that's a way that really allows students to like collaborate and have thought partners as they go. Also, don't be afraid to put check-ins in. It's like, okay, we've got this, you'll see it if you look at my Adams family thing. I did like a family reveal day in that pacing guide. So students had to be on pace, and then they found out they're Adam on that day. It's like, you've got to be on pace on that day. Then you'll find out your atom. We'll do a few things whole group, so that's important, especially in science for like labs, or if there's a certain like discussion that you need to have as a class, you can set those firm deadlines within the model and ask students to be on pace by this day, because you have to be ready for a whole group thing that would allow for some collaboration.
Another question is, how do you handle, like, how do assessments work? And in particular, how do you manage academic integrity when you have students working at different paces?
So assessments work through mastery checks for us. We also do normal, cumulative district assessments, formative assessments, whatever you want to call them. So those are given in a test environment, right? Like they're not given within the flexible MCP model on a day-to-day basis. Those are given in like we're pausing on this day after the close of the unit in order to do that assessment. But then there are lots of little assessments that happen during. Those are the mastery checks, right? And, part of that really is like building an environment of academic integrity in your program and being able to support. We have the lucky piece that we have district Chromebooks and our students are learning at home, so we can actually watch them on a separate monitoring software. So we have that to our advantage too. In an in-person classroom, you have the ability to scan and monitor your classroom for those sorts of things. The really critical part of that, and the thing that's really exciting, is that as you're gathering all of that data about how students are being assessed at their own pace, you can make a lot of in real-time instructional decisions as a teacher. Pulling students and conferencing is something that happens all of the time. Ms. Hill was saying, she goes from breakout room to breakout room and pulls students and conferences and is talking through specific skills and concepts with them in response to the data that she's seeing in their work. And so that's a really powerful piece of the model that I want to also pull up.
And one thing I'll add to the integrity, because I understand that like piece, it's like, okay, if these things are accessible all day, what can you do to like make sure that you're monitoring at those times that students are testing? Of course, if it's in person, you can even put passwords sometimes on your checks, and so that they can't get into it until they have that password. And you can kind of have that, if you're in person, have a table for them. If you're online, you could have a breakout room where like, all right, if you're testing, you have to come in this breakout room while you're testing and you're watching their screen, because we have a platform called Dino, or like making them turn their camera on in that breakout room so that you could have that space. Sometimes I could have two laptops and they're like, all right, this is my laptop where I'm watching people testing. This is my laptop where I'm popping around conferencing. That's another possible strategy.
There have been a couple questions too, a little bit different, but about like how you're differentiating within the lesson, like some of the ways you're providing differentiated support. And then one that was specific around, the process where a student may rewatch a video because they're not passing the lesson and they start to get frustrated. So how do you kind of provide supports, and how do you handle it when students maybe get stuck or in a lesson?
Yeah, MK, you can start.
So one thing that we actually missed this slide, that Matt was, I think it was the next one right after that introduction page, was what our English teacher, for example, has in any sort of like text. She has the dyslexic text. She has herself reading the text. She has the like normal text that you can read, and you can also use things to like differentiate to different reading levels. So that's one thing with differentiation. And also that's something I love with the must do, should do, aspire to do. Like I teach a biology class where students within the class are honors and not honors. And so by requiring this honor students to do all of the aspire to do's as well, that's a differentiation piece. And I've been really impressed by the ways that students do choose to take on those challenges, and when or the extra practice, because those things can help them reinforce it. If you're wondering about how that works in grading, because that's a question that I would tend to have, is the must-dos are the things that I make absolutely graded for me. Should-dos and my aspire-to-dos are graded. If the student scores at least an 80% on that, I give them the grade for it. Otherwise, I give them feedback and they can revise it until they get at least 80% to get credit for that should-do or aspire to do. So that's a way that allows for some differentiation. If a student's getting to the spot where they've like get to a certain assignment and like, I don't like this kind of assignment, and they stay on it and they stay on it and they stay on it. That's where it really becomes important for me to like connect with them, have them share their screen with me, walk them through the places where they're getting stuck, because I have seen students kind of like sometimes shut down and be like, okay, I don't want to go to the next thing. And so it just takes noticing like, okay, this student hasn't moved in a day or two, like what's going on? How can we make sure that that gets rectified? And we have office hours and times that students can schedule to come see us, but also really just going to them and having them share their screen and talking through what they need.
All right. I want to switch and put a question to Tiffany, because I saw this in the chat a while ago, but it was coming from a coach. And what would you say to a teacher to try to get them on board with Modern Classroom Project? And yeah, how would you convince them?
So I would literally say, go to the Modern Classrooms Project. That is initially what I did when I was shared that was something that Ignite was going to be implementing. And so when I went up there, to my surprise, there actually is a full detailed course. And a lot of the resources that you see MK using, they're provided in that free course. Of course, you get more if you purchase, but there are a lot of great resources to just browse and go through and see, what are the different dynamics that make up Modern Classrooms Project. You get to look at exemplars. So full courses laid out using web pages that teachers have completed and submitted and shared. So that's where I would start, is actually go to the site. I posted the link in the chat and just take a look, start browsing, exercise that exploratory learning.
Great. I also wanted to just address a question I got early on about adult learner variability, and just say that we do have an adult learner model. And this is a great tool to use as a coach when you're working with teachers, and also have them teachers reflect on their own learner variability. And when they're starting something new, like Modern Classrooms, and they have to learn in a certain way, just reflecting on what are their strengths and challenges with that, and how can you support them as a coach. So I dropped a link there if you want to check it out, but I love using this tool really as a way to support teachers and kind of helping them reflect on their challenges as when they're learning something new, and kind of they can advocate for their own supports. So I think we have time for at least one more question. And this one was one that came up is, what does a typical day look like for you, Mary Katherine?
Wake up, eat my breakfast. So whenever I go start class, we start by, I kind of try to engage them with some sort of question. You'll see one of our teachers, our ELA teacher actually, since I asked her for her flex seating slide, she did a full class slides, basically. So if you go on that MCP resources page that I dropped in the chat, it has, and I could drop it again, it has slides for what she does during the class period. She uses Pear Deck. You could also use Nearpod if you wanted students to like log into a link so that they could really follow along with the expectations. And generally, I start class with some sort of engagement question. I want to check in with the students, see how they're doing. Something that I found effective is sometimes using polls. So I'll kind of alternate days. So since my course is tested, and sometimes I know students have trouble staying on pace, and then sometimes the quarter ends and there are places where we have to figure out ways to get them caught up if they aren't staying on pace and don't get to everything. And so I try to make sure that I address content at some point during those minutes that we have all live. So I do like review where I like talk through it and have some poll questions where students can like give some input into what they're thinking in terms of like what I'm talking about. And then I love games also are great ways for students to have some review time whole group. So I use Bookit a lot, I use GimKit a lot, and that also gives that collaborative piece. Like today on a GimKit, I looked up and my little like person was sitting there, and all of the little 8th graders had decided to just start running circles around me. No one had talked about it, nothing, but it was like a little thing that they decided to do. So that gives some time for them to like interact with each other, even if it's like just names and knowing who each other are in the class. And so I usually set that for 5 minutes, and then I show the pacing tracker. I tell them the thing that's on pace. I give some shout outs to really highlight some things that students have been doing well. And then I always ask the question, and I've started to feel like broken record with it, and kids can laugh about the fact that I used to not think I said the same things every day. And now every day I ask them, what is your next step? Because that piece is really important in self-regulation to me. So I say, what is your next step? Tell me in the chat, what are you going to do next? So that I see that they tell me they know what they're going to do next and what they need to do next. So we have that moment to connect. And then I tend to open up breakout rooms. I have breakout rooms labeled, several that are meeting with me, several that are based on the lesson. So if they want to collaborate with anyone on whatever lesson they're on, they go there. And then some individual, if students need some like individual processing time independently. We go into those rooms. I pop around into the breakout rooms. Students will call me. I'm monitoring screens on Dino, and I can send the students links. Like if I'm like, all right, we're not on the lesson, or we're not on anything right now, I can send them the link, talk to them there in a message on Dino, and they can just immediately click on it and get into their next step. So if they haven't told me their next step, I know who needs to be checked in with, and that is something that's I've kind of do throughout class. And then once it comes time for the close, I'll check in with students, see if there are any questions, whole group at the end before we dismiss, and then they can come to office hours or check in with me the next day if there's anything else that they need or message me.
Jessica, if I could, I want to flip the question a little bit and just share, not from the perspective of a teacher, but what would it look like from the perspective of a student in a modern classrooms project scenario versus some of the experiences that we might have had. Before I came to Ignite, I was an assistant principal at a school that was extremely high needs in terms of poverty. And I saw students all the time who came in 45 minutes late because home was loud the last night and they slept and they missed the bus. And a parent needed to get across town from a job to drive them to school. And they walk into the classroom and the teacher's already finished the instructional part of the lesson and is now bopping around trying to manage different groups and different students that are on different paces, but don't have a structure to manage it. That student comes in and maybe gets instructions, maybe gets pulled into a group in the case of a really good teacher, but has certainly missed a chunk of instruction. I saw students who came from lunch where there was some sort of disturbance on the way back to class, and again, are trying to settle down and get themselves in a mode where they can really process. And that's hard to do. And again, they might miss. They might have a piece of paper that they didn't grab on the way in the door. And so now all of a sudden they're behind. Versus in the model that we have, a student can come in, see their unique number or ID on the board, know what lesson they're supposed to be on, and open it up and begin immediately to see those detailed instructions from their teacher outlining where to go. And then when they're ready, can pop over to the teacher station, can pop over with other students, can integrate themselves in a way where they become an agent in the context of the classroom, even if they're running late, even if something outside of their control caused them to be on a different schedule that day. And so I just want to share, we think a lot about the teacher experience, but this journey is really about changing the student experience in our schools. And I hope we can see that piece as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think that's a great way to kind of work. I know we need to wrap up here. I'd love if each of you could just share one closing thought on just how, the work that you're doing, the model that you're using, either helps you address learner variability or universal design for learning.
Mary Katherine, you can start.
So I'll start by saying that I feel like going through this model has definitely been rewarding and feeling like I've built something that is accessible to my students. And so I feel like that's the most important piece for me, making sure they're appropriately challenged and supported as they work through things, and that my time is freed up to be there for them in the needs that they're facing each day. And so that's something that I've really appreciated about the way that the model allows me to address my learners' needs.
So for me, the work would actually be just observing teachers and really focusing on using the learner variability tool, Navigator, to basically help teachers identify those factors to help better serve students, and each student in particular. So utilizing that tool is pretty much my main go-to. And of course, Jessica mentioned using the coaching feature.
Yeah, I think my big takeaway and excitement about the model is that the model itself builds that sort of agency and the executive functioning skills in students that are needed in today's environment. We live in a community actually here in Durham where Apple is moving 3,000 jobs, Google is moving 1,000 jobs, and a lot of those people that are getting those jobs are being flown in from California. And I find it ridiculous that we can't imagine a world where all of our students, 4,000 students in Durham public schools, don't one day occupy those jobs. And so in order to do that, we need to give them the skills and teach them in an environment that is a 21st century environment. And I really believe this model does that. And it reaches learners at a lot of different levels and builds agency in them so that they can do those sorts of things. That's what I'm really excited about in our program. And I hope you can see how this can apply in a lot of different contexts.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you to all our attendees for joining us and being so active in the chat and all your great questions. I will try to get all the resources onto the end of our slide deck and share that out when I share the recording, so you will have access to all the things that we shared today. And feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about learner variability. I think I'll email you, and so you'll have my email if you want to reach out, and Modern Classroom Projects link is also there as well. Thank you so much, everyone.